So I appreciate you doing the show, man. I know
You bet, man.
that it's somebody suggested this, and I was like, a game warden. I mean, so what if people take too many fish? I know it's an environmental issue, but like it can't be that compelling. And then, I'm thinking this is some guy that has a cool job, but it's like, okay, so you don't have a fishing license. Here's a ticket.
Right.
Not quite what you do now.
Yeah, it's an evolving discipline being a game warden, and not something I anticipated. And I got to give a shout out to one of our mutual followers that kind of connected us. And he had heard me on other podcasts and the outreach I'm doing all over the country on the cartel threats and how game wardens are getting involved in that. And I appreciate you taking the interest, man, and helping shed a little light on our nation's hidden war and being part of our thin green line of conservation and public safety. And that's really what this boils down to. I mean, when you think of a game warden, you think of exactly what you just said, Jordan. Checking for fishing licenses, too many fish, over limits of fish, that type of thing. Somebody poaching deer, not tagging their animal. You don't think of game wardens dressed up in as special operators, hoisting out Black Hawk helicopters and going after embedded cartel members that are armed with AK-47s in our forest, literally as close as the Silicon Valley foothills, where I'm 2 or 3 air miles right now as I record this from the Silicon Valley with you. You just don't think of game wardens doing that, but that is one of the many challenges we have to do now.
How many miles is a game warden responsible for, square miles out there? Because it seems like, you're alone, but you're not even close to anybody. Like you said, you have no backup a lot of the time. I just don't even, you're in the middle of nowhere. That's kind of the point, right?
Yeah, it is. And it varies. I'm going to take, my old home state of California as an example. And I was basically the South Santa Clara County game warden to start. And, I'm close to the Silicon Valley, so I'm going to have a smaller territory than like our mountain, our Eastern Sierra, Northern California game wardens. But I had easily 100 square miles, I'm going to say, give or take. And then when I became the lieutenant to supervise Santa Clara, San Benito, and part of Santa Cruz County, now we have hundreds of square miles for 5 game wardens and a lieutenant. You get into Northern California, bud, or you go over to the Eastern Sierras, and you got guys covering 300 square miles and very remote wilderness areas, high elevation, glacier, Sierra Nevada mountains, things like that. And if it wasn't for other sheriffs we work with and a lot of informants, a lot of public members that are kind of our eyes and ears out there being super sleuths, good ethical legal hunters and anglers and people out there recreating, camping, shooting, mountain biking, whatever. If it wasn't for those folks, we'd be nowhere near as effective as we are because we need that force multiplier. And, you've seen this in the books and you hear this term a lot, and I can't say this term enough, but game wardens are basically on the forefront of the thin green line. And the thin green line is kind of defined as, the limited number of people out there trying to hold back environmental destruction nationwide. Game wardens are on it from the law enforcement side. You're on it now. You're part of our thin green line, Jay, because you're helping spread the message of the things going on out there to gain awareness. And that's the thing we need more of.
I had no idea about most of this, and I go a little bit slow because we have plenty of time, so I'll get to all these things that surprised me. But I do remember my uncle and my dad calling a game warden once because some guys were shooting animals from a moving vehicle, which at the time didn't make sense why that was illegal, but now it's just such an unfair advantage that it's not sporting at all. And also, it seems really dangerous to be sitting in the back of a pickup truck, drinking and shooting at things that you think maybe are animals and maybe you're not totally sure are animals.
Yeah, that's the deal. The loaded gun in a vehicle problem is where everybody has those accidental discharges and somebody loses a leg, or worse, you have a hunter casualty and somebody dies because a gun went off in a vehicle, hit somebody in a vehicle, it got bumped, whatever. And so in the traditional days before I was doing the cartel fight primarily, I can't tell you how many of those citations I wrote for a loaded gun in a vehicle or shooting from a moving vehicle, mostly under the safety problem. And it is a completely unfair advantage to be rolling down the road at night and blasting stuff out of the window. There's a certain hunter ethic thing that just is pretty sick about that whole thing. And especially the guys spotlighting like animals at night. That was kind of the big game warden crime that I learned about in the academy. And growing up as an ethical legal hunter under generations of hunters in my family, my dad, my granddad, my uncles, I couldn't fathom that somebody would go out with a spotlight, sneaking around, and go find these animals at night when they're basically frozen and captive, and shoot them in the middle of the night and throw them in the truck and take them or not take them or waste them. One of the most heinous, disgusting wildlife crimes I could even imagine, And that spotlighting crime is huge in every state in the union, and a lot of people do it. And that's not only incredibly unsportsmanlike and, disgusting, it's very dangerous because now you're at night, sometimes there's drugs and alcohol involved, and you got a lot of loaded guns and you're shooting, over cabs. You can't see what's behind that target because it's dark. So who knows where that bullet's going, if it's going through that animal or not hitting that animal in a miss. Just the type of crime we needed to stop. And I did a lot of that in the first part of my career, and those were cases that mattered.
Tell me about these trespass grow operations. That's sort of the crux of this. How did you even find out that this was happening? What are these, by the way?
Yeah, so
let's start there.
Yeah, well, we'll go back to the early 90s. And essentially what was happening that I didn't realize when I started my career, and I was, from the San Jose Bay Area, went through the Fish and Game Academy at Napa Valley College in 1992. And once I got that job, I knew I was going to be, thrown anywhere in the state where they needed people. I didn't get to pick, hey, I want to be back home in Morgan Hill, California, right? So I ended up getting sent down after I went through the field training officer program, which is 3 months, 1 month with a hero trainer that's an awesome game warden that's going to mentor you, make sure you're doing it right, evaluate you every day. I did 3 of those throughout different parts of the state, and then ended up in Riverside County. So the Inland Empire just over the hill from Orange County. But I had the Cleveland National Forest between me and Orange County and Riverside, and I was getting close with Forest Service rangers, sheriff's deputies, and a Forest Service ranger, a really good friend of mine that was my partner, because we, on the federal level, they're as spread out as we are, we would work those spotlighting cases in our national forest by my house that I just told you about. And he said, hey, man, we're doing this cartel grow in the national forest. I said, cartel grow? What's that? He goes, yeah, we have Mexican nationals coming up. They're cartel-based, we know, and they're growing illegal cannabis, and they're doing it nomadically, and they're stealing water, and they're, kind of hiding and camouflaging their stuff. And this sounded like a movie. It didn't even sound like it could be possible. And I went on my first grow raid, actually, I think it was 93, and just accompanied the forest rangers and sheriff's deputies. We didn't catch anybody, but I saw my first cartel grow, and it blew my mind. There were like bunk beds, carved into the hillsides with camouflage tarps that were all spray painted with leaves and branches on them. And until you got right on top of thousands and thousands of illegal marijuana plants and saw these encampments, you'd never see it. You could literally walk 20 feet from it on the trail before you stumble into this thing. And it was very remote. It was like 7 or 8 miles into the backcountry. And all it reminded me of was stories from my dad and my uncles, that were servicemen. Several of them were in Vietnam. I think of my granddad in World War II, and especially Vietnam, like jungle warfare, guerrilla warfare, small hidden units, hiding in plain sight, doing damage. That's what it looked like, except it was in our borders, and it was on cannabis production. So that was the one only grow I saw down there. And then 2 years later, I transferred up to the Bay Area, where I'm from, and based my career out of the Silicon Valley, and didn't see another cartel grow till 2004. And that's an interesting story, and that's actually the first chapter of my first book, War in the Woods, that was published 12 years ago, because that was the eye-opener that, hey, this is in our backyard. And keep in mind that I grew up in South Silicon Valley. I hiked Henry Coast State Park, which is right in our eastern foothills, Mount Hamilton, harvested my first deer behind Mount Hamilton. That's a stone's throw from where you and I are having this conversation right now. And I get a call from a biologist buddy of mine that I've known since like 5th grade. He's doing his master's thesis on steelhead trout fisheries, endangered species at San Jose State, and he's watching a creek down on the edge of Coe Park out of the city of Gilroy that feeds out to the ocean, a very pristine waterway called Coyote Creek that to this day is one of the last migrating steelhead trout fisheries left on the West Coast. And for listeners and viewers to understand what a steelhead trout is, they're basically an ocean-run trout that live in the ocean, but they migrate upstream into freshwater creeks to lay their eggs and spawn, and then they migrate back to the ocean. They are so endangered and threatened now, and in such low number, they're worth about $30,000 to $40,000 a fish for a penalty from the federal level from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, right? That's how limited, Jordan, these fish are. Well, the creek that my buddy's studying, that has a ton of migrating fish in it. This is like April, so all those fresh steelhead fry, the babies, they're all hatching in the creek. All these frogs, aquatics, animals are drinking from this water. And all of a sudden, one creek is totally dry. And everything's dead. And we're right in the winter runoff where the creek should not be dry. Calls me up, says, John, this is crazy, man. Somebody's got to be plugging up the water up the canyon. I've never seen this before. Everything on this side of this part of the creek is dead. So I said, yeah, that's a problem. So I threw him in the truck. We go up the top of the mountain. I grab my pack, my gear, my AR-15. He's an unarmed civilian, but very savvy in the woods, fortunately. And we dive into the canyon to go try to track down where this water's going. And it was a super pristine canyon. There's some pictures in the first book of this area. And we go down into this beautiful, pristine, like box canyon, like something you'd see in a Grand Canyon, little tributary creek. And then we find the water source where it's diverted. And you've got visqueen line plastic. All the water is captured where the creek can't flow below it. There's a water line at the bottom. And a garden hose just starts going down this dry creek out of view. So, of course, we got to check it out, right? But it's kind of creepy. You know, something wasn't right. I'd never seen that.
Yeah. What are you thinking at this point, right? Are you like, oh, somebody, I mean, what do you're not thinking this is a cartel marijuana
Not
grow.
at
You're
all,
probably
man.
just,
No,
you're thinking like someone's gardening back here. I don't even know. What's your first hunch about what's going on?
The first thing I thought before we even went up there, given the circumstances, I thought it was like maybe an illegal cattleman or somebody diverting it for agriculture on their adjoining property. Because I would see some of that. I would see, water illegally diverted for development, or because they got to build something and they can't have the creek running because they need it dry, so they illegally divert it around it. That's what I thought it was, because that's all I had ever seen. And then I see a little garden hose in a little tiny creek. I'm like, okay, we're going to find like squatters down below. This is getting really strange. And, I had been in a lot of close calls up to that point. Hadn't been in any gunfights yet, fortunately, but I had been in a lot of situations where people were pulling dangerous weapons. I had my weapon out. I'm in cover. I'm hoping not to have to pull the trigger to, defend myself or somebody else. And I hadn't had that happen yet. But at the same time, you just develop a sixth sense of something's not right. The spider senses start to tingle. And, Jordan, that's where I was. I was like, okay, we're going to find something really weird that I've never seen before. I don't know if it's going to be super dangerous, but this is not a good position to be in because I have an unarmed civilian with me. He's my reporting party, an expert in the area. And the other thing about being in this canyon, man, is I don't have any cell coverage in this canyon. I don't have any radio service to hit my police radio and hit the truck up at the top of the mountain. So whatever happens down there, we need to handle,
Oh, man.
So we start going down the creek very carefully. My partner is very tactically savvy. He grew up doing the outdoor stuff, which was great. And then we start to see, 24-inch cannabis plants on both sides of the creek, and they're pretty fresh. They're not near harvest. You can tell they've been in the ground for a while, but they have a long way to go. And then we start seeing little camouflage covered kitchen area hiding on the side of the creek. And then I see movement, and here come two growers. And they're in the olive drab green battle dress uniform, a la military style. They've got the AKs. One guy's got a machete, and he's kind of digging around some plants. The other guy has his gun out. He's kind of scanning, looking around, and looking behind him, not knowing anybody's down in this remote canyon. And they're dead silent. They're whispering, or they're not talking at all. They're just kind of looking at each other and nodding their heads. And so what I'm seeing guys that don't belong there. I'm seeing guys with tactical proficiency. And at this point, with my law enforcement training and the tactical work I had done, I'm like, that's how we work on a SWAT team. That's how we move through the woods when we're tracking a fugitive or we're tracking like a mountain lion that's done damage or public safety. I said, these guys are not your typical poacher. And now we're hiding, because the last thing I want to do is get into a gunfight with one of these guys or both of them with an unarmed civilian biologist with me and no way to communicate to anybody. And we watched him for probably 10, 15 minutes, and they were, tactically, their situational awareness was up, and they checked their plants, they turned around, they went back up the canyon out of view, and that was it. As soon as they got out of view and we could safely go straight up that mountain and get out, we left the area. And then I processed what we were looking at, yeah.
That's pretty scary. I didn't realize you didn't even have any way to contact anyone. You're just out there. If they had seen you before you saw them, that we might not be having this conversation.
Possibly we might not be having this conversation. That's not an exaggerated statement. And I can also say that that was historical because that's the base of Henrico Park where I learned to backpack. I learned to really love wildlife, and where I was an engineering major at San Jose State my first year in college, looking at the ROTC program for Special Forces and doing a military GI Bill thing. And now I'm in Co Park on a winter break in college, my first year of engineering school, and I meet a game warden for the first time, and it changed my world. I'm like, I'm doing the wrong job, man. And so the point of my story is the damage was right on the edge of that park where I grew up. So this was personal. It's like, who are these guys? They're definitely not, they don't look like they're citizens. And no dig on anything immigration. We're not having any negativity on that conversation. But these guys look like foreign invaders. They look like more of a militia, more of a Sandinista. Something was going on, a military type force, small. And I later learned that those were basically a cartel cell from Mexico that had been in the area for now decades throughout all of California and the West Coast, and starting to branch out east to other states for the black market cannabis trade. And they were doing it on public lands, and I happened to run across one for the first time, on that day in 2004.
How do you, so they're stealing the water. How much water are we talking about? Because aren't cannabis plants pretty thirsty? They don't I don't really know, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, the average, what we've got scientifically from biologists that study this stuff, legal growers that, use water and conserve water and use as little as possible for legitimate cannabis, because there is a faction of very environmentally conscious cannabis farmers out there. They're actually allied with our cannabis enforcement program through the Department of Fish and Wildlife, my alma mater, where I retired from. And the general rule of thumb is, on an average, about 5 gallons of water per day per plant for an outdoor cannabis plant. So. Oh, wow. If you start doing, and Jordan, when we get into the math on that, this grow that we found in 2004 that we got out of safely and later raided with a bunch of agencies because we found it, so we brought everybody in, that was 7,000 plants. And those plants were a strain that take about 250 days to get to harvest time. And if you look at 7,000 plants for 250 days at 5 gallons of per plant per day and start multiplying it and add up all those zeros, that grow is responsible for probably 5 or more million gallons of water stolen for one grow site. And,
wow.
And it's not only about the water loss. I mean, because obviously you and I are both here in California. We know how the drought has stricken this state over the last 10 years, especially now. We're on water rations right now throughout the state of California and other states. Even in my new home state of Montana, we're experiencing drought levels like never before as well. The whole West and Southwest is dealing with this. So water is becoming liquid gold, man. It's becoming a rare, precious commodity across the globe. And illegal cannabis is one of the biggest water stealers going on anywhere in America, and especially in the Golden State, because what these cartels are doing. So I didn't know any of this then. I mean, I was thinking, hey, man, they're diverting water, they're poisoning it, my fish are dying. That's a bad problem. But it never crossed my mind of, what is this impacting for water levels in general, for underground water, for wells, for farmers, for ranchers, for drinking water, for cities. I had no idea. We had never experienced water loss like this. And now that was just one of what would later lead to thousands of grows that we would work until I retired, all stealing millions of gallons of water unless we stopped them and basically stopped the stealing, but we would still have a loss up to the point that we finished the grow off.
How do you find them? Just walking around out there seems like pretty, I mean, there's such a huge amount of land. That's why we didn't know they were there before. So do you just wait for hunters to stumble across them and call you, or what?
That's a good way we find them, because people that go in the outdoors and go off the beaten paths, get off the public paved trails and go deep into water sources to hunt, to fish, just to get real serene and have some solitude, those are the folks that find them. And our turn in a poacher hotline when I retired was over 70% of illegal grows being found by these outdoor enthusiasts, right? And then it gets to the point of what type of safety training, what do you tell people, like what do you do if you run into a grow site? And I teach that all over the country now, and we do it at the agency level as well. You may run across these in any state that has a decent climate in summertime months. That could be a cartel grow, and you just want to be really careful when you see it, document it, take a photograph, get a geotag, creep out of there carefully, don't go any further down that trail, and report it immediately when you get out there. And now, this hidden war, as we're calling it, the title of the new book, is aptly named a hidden war because so many people don't realize this is going on, even though we've been talking about this for 15 years on documentaries, investigative news pieces, high-reach podcasts like yours, and Joe Rogan, who's part of the Hidden War Fight Now, and the Thin Green Line, and Meat Eater, all of that. I still am going across the country, and people are like, Lieutenant, I had no idea this was going on in our country. I hear about the human trafficking, I hear about fentanyl, but poison cannabis and animals and, game wardens, what's going on with that?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of water being stolen, and it's not only on public land now, man. We got to look at the private land issue. And this may jump ahead a little bit in the conversation, but it'll all make sense. One thing that you learn about and I really go into this in Hidden War Edition 1, and then I update with the latest one that just dropped, Edition 2, that you've got a copy of. How bad has cannabis, basically production, how bad have the cartels increased the problem since we regulated under Prop 64, as an example, in California? And it's gotten worse. Regulating cannabis didn't help the black market. It actually helped stop it, rather. It actually incentivized it. And so now we have the public land threats of these cartels going out that, we've been fighting for almost 20 years now. But we've also got private land tracts in outdoor rural communities with these big hoop houses full of illegal cannabis that are in plain view. You don't have to go sneak around to find them, because illegal cannabis, under Prop 64, they watered it down to a misdemeanor. And if you're a juvenile grower, or say a juvenile cartel grower, it's an infraction. So if you have 7 illegal plants in your backyard as a mom and pop operation, or you have 7,000 in a hoop house with EPA banned carbofuran sprayed all over them to keep everything off it, but now you have a neurotoxin on the plants that are going out to the consumer, on illegal water stealing, illegal wells, all kinds of other crimes, it's a misdemeanor. So these guys are doing it in plain sight, knowing that less than 10% of their product statewide is ever going to get interdicted and taken, and they're probably not going to see jail time or not lose their property, because unless there's aggravated things we can charge felonies on, they're going to face a misdemeanor, and they're just overwhelming law enforcement. So we've kind of greenlit the cartels to do more damage than they were back in the days when it was just that outdoor backcountry in the woods public land grow problem, unfortunately.
Yeah, it sounds like a huge mess. So how do you take them down? I mean, once you find one or somebody reports on one, I assume you raid it. But how do you plan something like that?
Very carefully, because we've been in. It was 6 gunfights I had been involved in with my team members, give or take, that we had either experienced together as a unit, or individual officers have been involved in gunfights with cartel gunmen. By the time I retired in 2018. And I can't tell you how many close call gunfights we had that fortunately we didn't have to press the trigger, because we had really advanced good canines that were able to get a bite apprehension on a cartel gunman that was pulling a gun but got control of him before anybody had to fire a shot, so everybody went home. We go to massive lengths of officer safety. You got to remember that when this started, like when I found that grow in 2004, we brought in a task force of state cops and park rangers and sheriffs that did this type of work, and we had never done it as game wardens. We hadn't raided a cannabis grow site. There was no reason to. Nobody knew that there was an environmental crime related to it that game wardens should be involved in, but it was in our area. It was in our backcountry forest. So after that, started working with the Santa Clara County Sheriff's marijuana eradication team very closely. We formed a great relationship, and then we got in the first near fatal, where we actually had one of my partner officers shot by an AK-47 round and almost didn't survive that ordeal on Sierra Azul on August 5th of 2005, which is just above the city of Los Gatos that you are very familiar with. We both are. And I remember that day when we were ambushed, raiding that grow site. 3 game wardens and 3 sheriff's deputies and an unarmed ranger from Mid-Peninsula Open Space was there with us. And seeing the tactical proficiency they exercised, how they had their grow sites set up, how they had cover, how they had tactical advantage with a little bit of uphill advantage as we went in. And the sheriffs I was working with, were snipers. They were on their SWAT team. I was also outside of Fish and Game circles, a sniper now, and doing sniper class instruction and doing all the SWAT stuff and getting all those skill sets, knowing that we were going to need them someday as game wardens. And now I could not have envisioned it would have been for a cartel targeted fight, but that's what it turned into. And that day when we were ambushed and my partner was shot through both legs and bleeding out of 4 holes in both thighs, and waiting 3 agonizing hours for an air rescue before he gets airlifted out of there, literally within a couple minutes of dying of blood loss and shock. Tough officer. I mean, he absolutely fought through it every minute, kind of helpless waiting that long for him to get off the mountain. But he did make a full recovery, and he's had an exemplary career, great young man. And we were very lucky that he survived that ordeal, number one, or I'm sure we may not have stayed involved in that type of work as game wardens, and you and I might not be having this conversation for first. But secondly, we would not have been able to expose the environmental component of how dangerous these guys are to our wildlife, waterway, and wild land resources, and make it a priority for us, and actually form up our own team, which Hidden War goes into in depth in 2013 when we formed that team. Now the planning was going to be very, very structured. It wasn't going to be ad hoc of just jumping together with other agencies and, not having the right equipment, not having compatible radios, not having an air rescue plan and some redundancy in case, you got to get somebody off that hill quickly. We basically changed the game where we will find these grows a lot ourselves, Jordan. We'll find them by just going out and scouting the right hillside that faces to the sun to the south and where waterways are. And 50% of the time, when I'd go on a scout with my sheriff's buddies or with my game warden partners, we would 1 out of 2 times find a grow site in the Silicon Valley foothills, hands down. Aerial surveillance, we'll find them from the air if you know what to look for. When those plants have an iridescent green to them, even through brush and all the manzanita and oak scrubland we have in all these foothills around the Silicon Valley, you can see it that way. And satellite imagery has gotten amazing. We didn't have that in the days when that gunfight happened, and now we can literally scroll through sensitive satellite military level images and go, wow, man, look at the terracing there. That wasn't there, 2 weeks ago. And so they're a lot easier to find now, and it's really alarming out of how many you actually find when you just look at a Google image or have that person, that hiker, that hunter, that horseback rider, he or she, and they stumble on something and go, hey, man, I heard about this, or I saw a presentation, I saw this on National Geographic, one of your shows or whatever. This looks like a grow. What do I do? And that's exactly what it is. They found it. They got out of there. They stayed safe. They reported it right away. And then 9 times out of 10, they're 100% accurate. It is an active grow site. If it is on private land, but it's a trespasser on private ranch, or it's public land on our national parks, public parks, city parks, whatever, it's going to 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a cartel grow. And now we're going to plan it carefully to have everything we need the day we raid it. Canines, trauma medic on staff, additional backup teams. We formed up a very proficient sniper team, the Delta team, for the marijuana enforcement team when we formed that unit up. And the reason we had a sniper unit more than anything else was to provide overwatch and cover for our people going in and out of grow sites in areas where the terrain allowed that. Because what a sniper can see ahead of time can save so much violence later, rather than us stumbling into somebody and now we're 7 yards from each other in dense brush and the trails meet, and now it's a mano-a-mano gunfight that you can't avoid because he's already got the gun out. So all those things really changed the game, and I can proudly say that the guys that continued the team behind me made even more improvements, stepped up their equipment, their tactics continue to evolve to get better, and that team with my old agency haven't, knock on wood, had an officer-involved shooting where any of them were hurt or any of our canines were hurt, fortunately, since well after I retired, and we certainly hope that trend stays.
So how many guys work on these sites? You mentioned 2 in the one that you found. Are there huge ones with like dozens of guys, or are they usually pretty small because they have to maintain a low profile?
Yeah, they try to... The trend has kind of changed. In the outdoor grow sites, the trespass ones are deep in the woods, and those have lessened significantly. You don't see a lot of those anymore, because under Prop 64 now, they don't have to hide deep in the woods. They can just go on a private land track that a rural dirt road will run up to. And the problem, though, is in those, private land, in plain sight, super hoop houses, you have far more armed growers, far more potentially dangerous growers that are cartel-based than we did in the outdoors. On an outdoor grow, you typically have 2 growers that are very skilled at diverting water, at growing really good marijuana, at keeping, insects and people and everything off their plants, largely by bringing in these EPA-banned toxics insecticides, rodenticides called carbofuran that EPA actually banned from using them for agriculture in America over 20 years ago because they're so toxic, even when they're diluted. It's a felony to possess these poisons and these insecticide chemicals, but the cartels will bring them from across the border in Tijuana because they know when they get this stuff on the bud that people are smoking, making concentrated cannabis out of, or the leaf or the waterway under, basically the water and the soil all around those plants, nothing's going to get to the plants. Everything's going to die within minutes, if not seconds, whether they're rabbits, they're fox, they're mountain lions, they're black bears, or if we stumble into one and we don't have our protective equipment on and ingest this or inhale some of this odor, we too could be, severely incapacitated, if not killed. We're talking about, neurotoxins, anticoagulants, really, really potent stuff. And that's what these guys are doing. And now, so the two growers will set that up. And if the grow is typically over 5,000 plants, come harvest time, and on August 5th, 2005, one of the main reasons we encountered heavily armed gunmen that were ready to go early in the morning is because they were in the middle of harvest time. So that's when they have the most people in these grow sites. That's when they're the most dangerous. That's when they bring in the Sicario-type gunmen to defend the crop from law enforcement, from the public, from other rival gangs, from taking their crop during harvest. And you could have 10 guys in a grow site,
Wow.
We know that morning, Jordan, on all of Sierra Azul Mountain, that was one of like 5 grow sites where our gunfight happened. And we locked that hillside down for the weekend. And we were all taken off the hill because we had my partner almost shot near fatally. I had been in a gunfight. I had returned fire on his gunman. Another gunman that had a sawed-off shotgun trained on me and one other game warden at 7 yards through the brush that we never saw was seconds from taking me out and my partner out. But a sheriff's deputy, Craig Divert, call sign Snake on the sheriff's department, a great sniper, he saw that guy and was able to engage and neutralize that guy before he could shoot us.
Wow.
And I was seconds from taking a face full of buckshot. And I have pictures of that weapon that I show in presentations to go, guys, this is how crazy this gets. And thank heaven for my partners that day that were tactically ready, and all of us kind of fell into suit to doing the right thing, and we didn't have more than one officer hurt. But we didn't ever want that to happen again. So our administration took it very seriously, gave us the tools, gave us the support. It would take another decade plus before we'd have our own specialized team of game wardens just doing that I was very blessed to co-found and then lead. But man, we sure do a lot better job having a dedicated force to it and a lot more resources to do it now because this is a domestic eco-terrorist threat. And these cartels are not messing around on any level, as you know.
Yeah, so they're spraying these banned poisons everywhere. I assume that also gets in the water that they're stealing, right? And because they're doing it near these creeks, they probably just dump it all over the place.
Absolutely.
And it kills everything that it touches. I mean, that's awful. They're probably, it's wild. I mean, there's so many of these sites out there. It seems terrifying. You're running into, you mentioned earlier, these Vietnam-style booby traps. So they're setting this up, around there so that if you happen to stumble upon it, you can just die falling into a pit or something like that?
Exactly. And I think the most shocking thing is when in 2015 we found our first punji pit, and I have pictures of it in both books, actually. And what's interesting about that is anybody that has relatives that fought in Vietnam know that the punji pit was basically a Viet Cong guerrilla warfare tactic where our adversaries would dig a hole, usually square, rectangular. It would probably be 2 to 3 feet deep, and they take sharpened bamboo sticks, like razor sharp, stuffed into the ground with the sharp end straight up, and then they'd put like bamboo thatch over the top and dirt, so you're just walking on a trail. But when you get to a certain part in the trail, you fall into that trap, that rectangular bottomless door, and you fall right into those punji pits. And all those spiked up sharpened bamboo stakes, what do? They shear your ankle, they take out a soldier's foot, inner thigh. And what the Viet Cong would do is they would dip human excrement at the tips of those sticks, knowing that the bacteria infection potential from just aside from, in addition to a sharpened bamboo stick, would, if it's not going to kill that soldier right away, he's going to have a blood infection. That guy's taken out. 2 or 3 other guys are taken out to get him to help. Well, what we started to see was like Whiskeytown National Park up in Shasta County. Brian Boyd, great operator. You read about him in the books. Canine Phoebe, who had a 13-year legendary career and saved my life and the life of my partners way too many times to count. Amazing dog. She detected a punji pit on a trail right before our lead officer from the sheriff's department stepped into it. And this was several hundred yards from the grow site on a public national park trail that everybody was hiking on. No, not even close to the grow site. And it was set there to keep anybody from going any further so they would never discover the grow site. But in it were the sharpened sticks, except the EPA banned carbofuran was smeared all over the tips of them because these cartels know how dangerous those toxics are. And the only reason it was detected is our dogs are in those grow sites so much and trained to detect weird smells, and these toxics have a very unique smell. And Phoebe detected that and alerted before our point man walked right into that trail.
Phoebe's your dog?
Phoebe was one of our team dogs. She was kind of the dog that became really, really good at apprehending cartel guys in these grow sites, but also sniffing out threats ahead of time. And she died. Sadly, she died the year I retired. I believe it was July of 2018 of leukemia, but she had an amazing service life. She was operational for about 10 or 11 years, which is unheard of for an apprehension canine. Belgian Malinois, female, super friendly as my little yellow lab, belly scratches, never bite an officer, super smart. But we kind of affectionately called her the fur missile because when she saw a bad guy that was pulling a gun, if it was safe to deploy the dog so we didn't get into a gunfight, it was kind of fire and forget like an F-18 JDAM missile, man, just flip, and she never missed a target. And she had, it's pretty miraculous, but in all of her years of work, and she had 116 cartel apprehension bites and 800 to 900 more apprehensions where she didn't have to bite, where people just gave up. So, you know, when you look at the numbers, that's about 1,000 bad guys that are in this country illegally with criminal felony histories doing a ton of damage to, you know, not only our wildlife and our public safety in our woods, but we got to remember these cartels that we're apprehending in grow sites are the same ones that are making dirty fentanyl pills in labs, right? And you and I both know right now the fentanyl crisis, and I think we're approaching 200,000 nationwide deaths since fentanyl kind of dropped. These poison, you know, basically these dirty lab cartel lookalike fentanyl pills dropped on America about 5 years ago, and that is just it's blowing minds, and it's horrible. The human trafficking cells, the child sex trafficking cells, the gun running cells, they're all the same cartels. It's just a different part of the organization doing a different type of crime. So, you know, we've apprehended some of these cartel growers that in the winter, when they're not growing weed in the woods, they're cooking 22 pounds of methamphetamine. Or they're trafficking dirty pills from dirty labs in Mexico for fentanyl now, and they're all doing human trafficking for big money because it's a big money maker for the cartels, as we know, in all 50 states. And we know now with the border policy changing and becoming literally little, if any, border policy, to put it mildly, the cartels have carte blanche to bring contraband, people, whatever they're going to do across our southern and now our northern borders, incentivizing more of these crimes. So anytime in the woods, we would go do a cartel weed case, let's say, and Phoebe made a great apprehension. She took a guy out that was doing a lot of other very bad things outside of the weed trade, or was working for somebody that was diversifying and doing those activities as well. So, man, I can't talk enough about dogs, and everybody loves a good dog story. We all have dogs or cats or whatever and pets, but man, you know, it's they're lifesavers, and they're invaluable members of our team. And we have a lot of great dogs working on the team that I can't name, obviously, because they're operational for security reasons.
Sure.
But there are some pictures in the books that you've seen, and we've got some color pictures of some of these dogs that have worked, especially Phoebe. She's really highlighted and hid more a lot because she had a legendary career, and I think she helped validate the fight. She helped bring awareness. She was one of the rock star canines on our Wild Justice reality game warden TV show that ran 3 seasons on National Geographic Channel. Between I think about 2008 and 2010, and then we had enough of doing it, and we said no to more seasons. But everybody really resonates with our dogs, and when you start seeing dogs poisoned, and you know, you mentioned, so this stuff's on the water, the banned poisons are on the plants, they're everywhere. Our dogs are getting a hold of those things. They're walking across, you know, tainted soil with their paws. They might drink some water that's got it, and we've had a lot of our canines that are tier 1 apprehension dogs that military and law enforcement special operations put, by the time you're done training these animals, you're at $70,000, $80,000 or more. The training, the pedigree, the breed they come from, the ball drive, the intelligence. And we've had dogs that come from perfect breeds, a season and a half into their career of 2 years, and all of a sudden they contract some leukemia cancer and they're dead within a couple of weeks, and we got to put them down.
Jeez.
And we
That's
know,
terrible.
And we know it's got to have some link to all those poisons we're seeing. So the hazmat protocol now with poisons in grow sites, and not only in the deep woods on the public land trespass stuff, but these private land grows, which I'll tell a few stories about in a minute with what we just saw recently in our latest documentary. Man, it's sickening. You don't want to see anybody in and out of these grows.
How do you clean it up?
Yeah,
because you're going in there and then you get these guys, hopefully they're there and you can arrest them. But if they're there for months, there's got to be literal human excrement everywhere, trash everywhere, because they got to eat stuff and throw stuff away. And if they're stealing water, they got pipes or whatever in there and chemicals, weapons. I mean, there's got to have a whole. I've got 2 little kids here. And we throw away a ton of garbage.
Right.
Maybe they're not doing as much damage with Amazon Prime as we do, but otherwise they're still leaving a lot of crap. That's a lot of crap all over the place.
Yeah, it's a literal shit show of trash out there. No exaggeration. There's a couple pictures in some color pictures in the new editions of Hidden War that you've got that go into just one of these grow sites. And I have a couple of snaps of we're not even going to get into the deadly poisons and the big water diversions and all the nastiness in the creeks, just the trash. And especially a grow site that's been out there more than a year. Because, these guys start as early as, March, April, getting their plants in the ground. And they might go all the way till September, October if they're not interdicted by a team like ours. And you're right, it's 2 guys, and in harvest time it's up to 10, maybe more guys. And you just get the human excrement, you get the cooking oils, you get the propane bottles, you get the food wrappers, and you just get that stuff stacking up. And they just kind of, stuff it in the ground. They might, dig a little pit and just like a mini landfill going on in these grow sites. Mm-hmm. But it's all the fertilizer bags, it's all the Roundup, and then it's all the carbofuran and the little, deadly pink bottles that we definitely have pictures of in the publication so people can know what this stuff looks like and don't go anywhere near it, right? Don't touch it. Don't breathe it. Make sure the wind is, not coming at you. Make sure the wind's going at your back toward it. You don't even want to get a whiff of this stuff. It's so deadly. The hardest part about the job, and when we formed the marijuana enforcement team, and we really needed other agencies to help us with this, and by 2013, when we started that team, everybody was kind of on board that you can't just go in and try to apprehend these guys, and you can't go in and just try to destroy these poison plants and remove them from the market and from consumption for poison, all that. You got to do something with the trash, and you definitely got to restore the waterway. And it's called reclamation, or what we call environmental restoration. And it's by far the hardest, most arduous, most time-consuming, and most resource-eating as far as blade time for helicopters and money to clean these sites up. Because if you have a banned poison container in there, that's a hazardous material now, right?
Yeah.
So you got to handle it with a hazmat team. We might not even be able to touch it with nitrile gloves, with our N95 masks, with our long sleeve uniforms that we can do decon on. I mean, there's heavy Cal and federal OSHA protocol now on how we handle this stuff in grow sites. But I can tell you right now, when I retired, we were able to reclamate the day of our missions about 44% of all the grows we would raid that day. And that doesn't sound like a big number, but when we were coming from less than 5% nationally, especially statewide in California, because other agencies were like, hey man, I'm not collecting trash and cleaning up. We don't have that bandwidth. We're gonna go arrest, we're gonna eradicate, and we're gonna helicopter out, or we're gonna hike out. We're out of there. We have too much other things to do. It's too costly. We can't tie up our SWAT units that long. But that's all changed, and it's changed for the good, that everybody's on board, that water is so precious. It's the major Achilles heel of what we're losing, and then poison water is even worse. So we're reclamating, and they're reclamating a lot more now. Since I retired, we're bringing civilian teams in that can kind of they can learn to safely deal with these poisons. They can get trained in it. We're getting, NGO 501(c)(3) funds developed for groups to go in and reclamate sites. And even if there's not another grow site on public land for the next 10 years in California, hypothetically, which will never happen, but if that were to happen hypothetically, we would keep these reclamation crews on historical grow sites that haven't been cleaned up going back 20 years, probably for a decade. Conservative estimate. I mean, that's how much stuff is still out there. And not only in California, brother, but in other states that have growing climates, not as good as California, but they can still do it either indoors or outdoors.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show. If you leave all the stuff there, it's just going to pollute for years and years. I mean, I guess the water's going to get diverted, the chemicals are going to leak out and everything. And it just, oh man, it just seems like such a huge mess. Can you even get trucks back there? I mean, what do you do? Just take up hundreds of pounds of garbage and you got to lift it out with a helicopter?
Pretty much
plastic pipes?
Yeah, no, you're hitting on the head, bud. What you got to do is we get as far as we can on trucks. We have a landing zone with big dump trucks and trailers. Mm-hmm. We have to have an airship. We'll usually hike in. We'll bag all the trash in really, really heavy, like Caltrans contractor bags. We'll tie them up. We'll collect all the water pipe. We'll take out all the poisons. If there's any diversions or things in the creek, immediately we'll rebuild a creek. I can't tell you how many little mini dams we have taken apart slowly, taken out the rock and the concrete they bring in, the dirt and the adobe, just to open up that waterway so it'll flow again. And then make sure the water diverting pipe is taken out. And that black poly pipe that you see the pictures of in all the books, if you leave that stuff out there, they're just going to come back and use it again. And what was interesting is,
that makes sense.
And your question is like, well, what happens if you don't clean it up? Two things, and you hit it on the head. One, the environmental damage is going to continue. But what we got to realize is if we don't take that infrastructure out, that cartel cell is going to wait a year at the most and go, you know what? I know how tied up law enforcement are right now. And I know that right now in California under Prop 64, everything I'm doing is a misdemeanor. And they're going to get less than 10% of probably our grows statewide. So I'm just going to go use all that infrastructure that's going to cost me nothing. I'm going to I'm going to get that water diversion going again because all the water pipes there. I just got to start the flow again. I'm going to set up a camp. I might move a quarter mile downstream where I'm not exactly where my last camp was. And you know what? 70, 80% chance I'm going to get away with it. And if I do lose that grow, that's my satellite grow to tie up law enforcement resources, say in Los Gatos, because I got 20 other grows I'm responsible for as a plaza boss, which is what they call these guys that are overseeing a particular sector of the state within a particular cell or a particular type of cartel. And now they're like, hey, it's totally worth it. But I go into this in chapter 4 of the new book. I got to sit through a debrief of a plaza boss that our white dope team in Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office interdicted on a 22-pound methamphetamine cook in the winter. And this guy was facing a lot of time. And what we were basically, that's big, man. That's a big quantity for a better part of probably the West Coast. But obviously he wanted to be cooperative and, had to be protected and all that, but wanted to speak freely and, maybe affect what was going to happen to him as far as his sentence and things like that. But it was the first time what we all thought we knew in the green dope side of the illegal cannabis trade from the cartels. I got to ask a lot of questions directly in that interview, along with DEA and officials and, interpreters. And we knew that this reclamation wasn't just about environmental restoration. And we all wanted to convince other agencies that, hey, it's not just about, Smokey the Bear cleaning up the woods, restoring waterways, protecting, what they've destroyed. Think about if we take all that out. And we've already rated it. Maybe we've caught a few guys. What are the odds of guys going back there from that organization to affect that particular sensitive waterway? And I said it's slim to nil because we were seeing a site we'd reclamate and we'd watch it year after year after year, and very rarely, if ever, would a cartel come back and use that site. But if we didn't reclamate it, like in the example we just discussed, about 50% chance by the next year a cartel group was going to use it because they knew it had water. They could set it up very easily. They didn't have to go find a new creek. And I asked him that, and he basically said, it's interesting. He said, I had not seen our grow sites that you guys had raided up until a couple years ago actually cleaned up. And we're like, what's going on? And I knew that our agency, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Forest Service, and very like-minded sheriff's departments like Santa Clara that were very environmentally conscious and were putting their resources as a sheriff's department, not a conservation agency by define, and they were doing cleanup. And the cartels were starting to notice, like, why are they cleaning grows up, man? That's weird. We've never seen this in 20 years. These things never get cleaned up. But he validated what we're talking about. He said, no, I'm not going to go back in there. It's cost me $30,000, $40,000 of our organization's money to set up the water line and get all the camping equipment and get these guys equipped and across the border if they're not already embedded and bring the poisons up from Mexico. So I'm not going to risk that. Why would I go back into an area that you guys have cleaned up, spend the money again, and it's already on your radar? So that was like a Yahoo victory moment where we could tell other agencies, hey guys, help us reclimate. Even if it's in the off season, we'll bag it. We'll bring in a helicopter in the middle of winter. We'll hoist it all out. We'll do the heavy lifting, whatever. And that's made a dent, but it's also helped deter the cartels from doing what they're doing in the woods. And it's going well. And we still do that every year, constantly. It's the biggest.
Jeez.
Probably. I'm not going to say it's the most important job, because obviously if you got an armed cartel gunman that's doing a whole lot of other, human public safety crimes, you want to get him out of circulation for sure. But it's that lasting effect on the environmental side. It's public safety first, and it's the triple W's, wildlife, waterway, wild lands, that we're all about on the Thin Green Line. And when we can do both, that feels really good.
So maybe I'm naive here. Obviously, I know nothing about catching criminals, but would it not be worth luring these guys to come back to the same site and just check those sites and then arrest the guys, because you have essentially a honeypot to where these guys, they're coming back, so just watch it with a drone, and then it's like, yep, these idiots are back, and then you go raid them or whatever. What am I missing where you don't... Why do you want them to go to a new site? I guess that's what I don't understand.
Yeah. No, you're making good sense, and you're actually without going into intel and how we do business. Let's just say what you just said makes a lot of sense, and it's been done and it's worked. We've had different cat and mouse games of doing things. The only thing is, if you're going to try that tactic, you kind of got to look at, okay, if I'm going to do that, I'm not going to do it on a sensitive waterway that has like migrating steelhead trout in it. I'm going to do it where the water diversion is kind of contained. Maybe they're not taking too much water from a creek, or they're doing it with what they call check dams, and it's a series of dams that they fill up in the heavy winter floods, and then then they don't pull from the creek anymore. We've seen that, and ones that are accessible. That you can go in and actually have a honeypot and catch some people. And it's a cat and mouse game. It's an evolving science. The ultimate goal of what we're trying to do is put enough pressure on them, knowing that there's skilled teams that are not going to just chase you around or fly the helicopter over so you get scared away. You hide in your little hole for a while. We leave after we cut all your plants and clean up the grow site. And you just go, okay, well, I'm not going to work this grow site, but my boss on my burner cell phone that I'm going to call, tonight, he's going to have another grow that he's going to have me in a day. And it might be 200 miles in Northern California. These guys, think of it like a contractor crew of skilled builders, right? You're finishing one house and the drywall guys are coming in and you framed it, but you're a framer. And now all of a sudden your framing's done for any reason, maybe because the house burned down or the guys moved on to another stage. You're just going to be moved to another complex to go frame another house. That's how these guys work. They're very skilled, man. And let's just say they're a very formidable enemy, given how proficient they are and how skilled they are at camouflage and hiding in plain sight. As you you and I start to talk of the story, you're seeing the different layers of what means they're going to go to make the money they can make, and it's a lot of money.
How long are these grow sites in use? Are they around for months, or do they just use the same places for years on end until they get raided or discovered, or they fall apart for some reason?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm going to take the Sierra Azul 2005 shootout site, August 5th. We went into what we knew was one site that was being used again, that had been used at least 2 or 3 seasons before, what our intel and our pre-scouts with the sheriffs and what the sheriffs had done ahead of us even being involved dictated. But that weekend, when we locked that mountain down and there were guys camped out with MVGs and all of our officers from multiple agencies, because we knew there were a lot of bad guys in the area and we wanted to catch people that might have gotten away. And when our helicopter teams and our other officers started to hike that mountain, they found like 5 other grow sites on an entire hillside that spanned over a mile, actually a couple of miles. And when we started to look at the leaf litter, the cuts in the trees, the amount of trash, that grow site had been in play for at least 5 years before it was detected. And so these growers, man, they are going to use that same site as long as they don't get caught. So if we never interdict it, and it's in Sierra Azul, it's in Los Gatos, it's over in Santa Cruz County on that side of the mid-pin, if it's in Henrico State Park, they're just going to keep stealing water, adding to the trash pile, killing a lot of stuff downstream until they finally get caught. And some of these don't get caught. A lot of times we've had situations where the grow site will have been used for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. And then the water table just changed, or that we went into a drought and they didn't have water anymore, so they just left. They never got caught. They did a ton of damage in a decade. And then bighorn sheep biologist, say in the Eastern Sierras, that works for our agency as a biologist, finds this thing on a survey and goes, "Oh my God, man, I can't believe what I walked into." I mean, it looked like an active grow site, like as if you took that snapshot in time, right? Like a crazy movie, and you walk into it, and it's like everything's frozen, and the camp is there, dead plants are there, water diversions are there, all the supplies, old food is still there. There might be guns, there might be camos, there might be tents, bunks, whatever, but they never got caught. They just left because they ran out of water. And now that's been there for all those many more years that a biologist had to find. And we're going to go reclimate that even though we never raided it. So long-windedly, it could be 2 months because we catch it early and we burn it to the ground and capture them, and that's ideal. I always like when we would find these grow sites really early in the late winter, like about now. Like right now we're talking March-ish, right? Beginning of March. This is when everything kind of gets started, whether it's a wet year or a dry year. And when we can start finding these grow sites when they're in the ground by April and May, and the plants are like 2 inches tall, and you have 10,000 plants that are 2 inches tall, and you fill a Safeway plastic shopping bag and your eradication's done. They haven't stolen that much water. That's the ideal scenario. It's when it gets late in the summer and the plants are 11 feet tall. They've stolen millions, if not upon millions of gallons of water, and tons of dead wildlife. They're very comfortable in their environment. They know every sound. They know every trail. They're armed. They have escape routes. Now it becomes far more dangerous for us, and it's already had a massive environmental impact. And 11-foot plants aren't fun to destroy, no matter how you do it. We like the little babies. So,
what do you do with the marijuana after you seize it? I assume you can't sell it, even though it's legal in California because of Prop 64. A drug dealer, you auction it off. But I guess if you seize cocaine from a drug dealer, you don't sell it. This is somewhere in between. But the whole toxic, super toxic, poisonous pesticide all over it might preclude that.
Yeah, and I don't get that question very often, so it's a great question. You're right. It's an illegal cannabis product, so it can never be in the legal market. And under the legal market, under Prop 64, you basically have to trace seed to sale. You have certain protocols and permits you need. You have to be able to document where the plant was grown, where it was processed, ultimately what dispensary or what consumer outlet it went to, and usually that's through a distributor, right? Everything is documented. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of overhead, there's a lot of red tape, just like a normal American business where you pay taxes and you have, health and human safety protocols. All this stuff is strictly black market. It would never be legal, even if it was a organically pure product grown in the outdoors or even in an indoor operation, because it came from an illegal source. So we have to destroy it very carefully. Sometimes, if it's not budded, we can cut it. We can destroy it in place where it's not going to be a poison or pollutant out there. It's just going to be a dried up plant out of the way where it's going to not get into water. We will hoist out a lot of it in helicopter nets. We've had to carry that stuff out wrapped up in tarps on our backs. We even had, and hidden where we talk about Canine Phoebe, armed gunman, and a pack mule named Stanley, where we had Stanley, one pack mule, and I knew the pack mule handler, very close to where I grew up in Morgan Hill, and we didn't have any helicopter that day, and he had one pack mule out of 20 because 19 of his other pack mules were already up in the Yosemite Basin to run pack trips. And I said, "John, I need a pack. Can we use pack mule? Anything, man. We cannot lug this out ourselves." It's a great idea. Whatever you can use. Helicopters are great, but ultimately you can't just dump that stuff in the dump. This stuff goes to landfills that are specially selected. A specific hole is dug. It's mulched up carefully. It's witnessed. It's videotaped. It's buried. It's destroyed. So it can never be used. Never be dug up. When it comes to the banned poisons, if some of that stuff has banned toxics on it, we have to dispose of it very carefully, whether it's, a non-penetrable liner in a landfill so it can't seep into waterways. All kinds of stuff like thinking about a waste product from another hazardous material. How do you deal with that stuff? You can't just put it in the ground. because you're going to have residual into the water table, into the soil. And carbofuran is that bad. Metaphos, all of these things. So it's pretty involved. And one of the challenges when we started the team was making those accounts with certain landfills around the state of California that were on board that, hey, anytime, we can't tell you when we're going to raid, but have your landfill ready because we might be bringing you a whole lot of weed that's got to get destroyed and buried. And these organizations have been really good. They get it. And the other thing is, like I said, we're allied with legitimate cannabis. And legitimate cannabis, the guys and gals that are trying to do it right, that are being pushed out of business by these cartels because the black market is undermining them and they're all going under.
Right. If you don't pay for your water and you don't pay for your land,
Yeah.
you can undercut on price probably pretty easily from the guy who has to pay for certifications and everything.
Right. And imagine how saturated the black market for cannabis is in California right now, driving the legal market price down, saturating the market, and just incentivizing more interstate transport to other states where it's illegal, which now becomes a smuggling, trafficking operation for illegal weed. So there's a lot of just messy problems with regulation in general. And something I always talk about when I speak to this, and I'm glad we brought it up, just randomly right now, is, like I said in Hidden War, if you're going to regulate cannabis, it doesn't matter where you sit on legal cannabis, illegal, just regulate it right. Regulate it in such a way that people doing it by the numbers are making sure they get an organic, pure product to legal consumers that are now legally allowed to use cannabis. And we're at 45 plus million Americans are regular repeat cannabis users. Deal with that. Make sure that cannabis is quality, man. Make sure it's coming from a good source. Make sure it's coming from a legitimate market. Don't mix in this toxically tainted, very potent, very, accessible cartel weed that's all over the country into that equation. And that's when I talk about, when I start to get a little bit political on policy, that's where things like Prop 64, the structure needs to change. If we're looking at national legalization, because this question comes up all the time, you got to make sure you go after illegal cannabis with felony statutes, because you're always going to have water loss, you're always going to have environmental destruction, you get a lot of violence, a lot of human trafficking, a lot of banned poisons. We saw that on all the private land grows up in Siskiyou County when filming, when I was co-hosting Helping the Daily Caller and Jorge Ventura and his guys out on the Narcofornia documentary up in Siskiyou County just last summer. And Jordan, I was blown away, and that's kind of what got you and I connected. Was one of our listeners and followers going, dude, you got to talk about this. I think Jordan would love this story.
Yeah.
And it's what it kind of evolved into. Now you got the Asian cartels coming from back east, the Mongs and the Chinese, and the Mexican cartels all over NorCal, and literally coming into counties where they are so remote, they have so little law enforcement presence, but the sad part about that situation of these remote counties is they have the best water resources left, like Mount Shasta, right? 13,000+ feet, 7th natural mountain wonder of the world. Mount Shasta with all that glacier white water we see every year. That's as pristine as it gets for Siskiyou County, and all of that water is being stolen. Illegal wells, water trucks stealing city water in the middle of the night. Ranchers, farmers being threatened at gunpoint to say, hey, your water table's going to drop. You may run out of water. Don't make a problem and you'll survive. Literally having cartels taking over Siskiyou County, trying to actually manipulate politics in a way. And people that have been there for 100 years, ranchers, farmers, true Americans, families, said, I'm out. I'm moving to Washington. I'm going to Alaska, man. I'm surrounded by cartel growers. I hear gunfire at night. I got dogs fighting. I got dogs that are all cut up and animal abuse by the neighbor's dog that's supposed to be a guard dog for this cartel grow house. And all of these grows, bud, they're not deep in the forest. They're in a very remote area you can get to on a road. But they're next to a house. And they're a big hoop house with big plastic lined tops, white. And what we noticed, which I wasn't even privy to, I'd been in operations for about 3.5 years at that point. And now I'm going back in with Siskiyou County sheriffs I worked with previously and watching what they're up against as we're doing that documentary, and blown away that all those same toxic poisons I'm talking about that the Mexican cartels use in the outdoor deep woods are on a majority of these plants. Adhesive spray glue, other pesticides and toxics, carbofuran, just a Molotov of junk. And it's sprayed all over these plants to go to the ultimate consumer on the black market. But it's not in the open air where it's still so deadly. It's in a It's in a tarped in like hoop house. And until we could ventilate that and open it up, you can't even go in that thing, man, without being completely asphyxiated on the poison. And
Crazy.
it was even more concentrated, more of a problem. But that just comes down to taking what we've learned and applying it to sensible regulations and trying to keep political gain and financial gain out of it. Because I've always said when politics are about personal gain or they're about some sort of revenue generation, public safety and wildlife resources are going to suffer. And Prop 64 epitomizes that problem. And that is the big debate in our state of California that, you and I spend a lot of time in.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that legalizing marijuana would change the equation here for the better, but it seems like then you just have lighter penalties, and you also have the fact that you can always undercut legitimate operations by doing something illegally, except the market is bigger. And
exactly.
You can hide your stuff. So that definitely makes sense that that's a problem. Actually, a long time ago, or a year or two ago, we had somebody write into Feedback Friday, which is our advice segment on the show, and they said they rented a house that was sort of remote. It was a farmhouse. They rented it to somebody, and that person illegally subletted that house to these growers. And the guy showed up because he was like, I can't remember why the landlord or the renter actually showed up. And he's like, these guys were like, get out of here. And he's like, this is my place. And there were locks that were changed. And he realized, I don't even think the growers were there. He just saw that there was a marijuana grow, and he called the guy he rented to, and the guy was like, I don't know, I just subletted it to these guys on the internet
what
illegally.
happened? Yeah.
And what happened, which now I think that guy was probably just a cutout for the cartel renting for them on their behalf. But he was like, what do I do? And we're like, don't go back there.
Right.
Because he's like, I'm going to go back there and tell these guys to get out. And I'm like, you don't know who you're dealing with, man. These guys, if they have $1 million worth of weed or whatever, how much are these grows worth, actually? I don't even know. What are 7,000 marijuana plants valued at?
Wow, man. If you're right now in the legal market, the price per pound, I think, is like $300. It's ridiculously low for tier 1 cannabis, right? Which I'm going to get into why that's so bad for the legit cannabis industry and some examples, working with some very legal, very water conservation oriented growers that we just interviewed for our next film project. But basically, I know that the Asian cartel cells have such a distribution route, and they keep a high profit margin going because most of their stuff is going to the Midwest and the Eastern Seaboard from Siskiyou County. And we were watching that plain clothes of the U-Haul trucks leaving and heading east like every hour. A U-Haul truck was, without having any pressure put on it, just taking this stuff back east to be sold. And they're still getting over $1,000 a pound. Probably more, actually, for high THC content, but again, not dispensary weed, not organic, probably has a bunch of this crap on it. But because the black market's thriving so much at $1,000 or $1,200, maybe $2,000 a pound for the black market weed on a good day, what are our legal growers doing at the dispensary level? They're having to get so low on their price that they're able to sell this stuff. And then they look at their overhead and all the oversight and all the taxation and inspections and permits needed that so many good growers are leaving the industry. They're just going away. And we interviewed 2 growers that, back in the days, way before Prop 64, they were organically pure. They weren't poisoning anybody, but they were black market farmers. They just ran the black market. That's how they made their living. They did it illegally, but they weren't hurting anybody directly from that. They weren't violent. They weren't stealing a bunch of water. They weren't using poisons, and they definitely weren't cartel. Now they go to get regulated like, okay, I'm going to give this Prop 64 a chance. And we filmed and interviewed up in Lake County a multi-million-dollar cannabis farm that looked like the best citrus farm I'd ever seen, or the best Christmas tree farm. It was fenced. It had the California Department of Fish and Wildlife inspection, posters on it. The water from their own wells was being uber conserved. I mean, it was just the conservation on it, Jordan, was crazy. I was listening to these growers talk to me about, the 5 gallon per plant per day figure that I put out there. And they're both telling me, the gals are going, oh, no, that's totally accurate. That's an average. If you got like an illegal group that doesn't care about water conservation on a hot day in Mendo County or in Lake County, they can burn 12 gallons per plant per day to get to harvest. Wow. They said, we're getting it down to like 2 gallons or less a day. And I said, how is that even possible? And they were actually taking tree branches and other substrate and burying it under the ground of their farm that would hold the water like a sponge. So they would water very limited through the drought situation and get still very good dispensary level cannabis. I mean, award-winning cannabis like the Emerald Cup actually were what these farms are producing. And they were using a fraction of the water. And they're authorized to use as much water as they need within what their wells can do. But even being conscious of just not wanting to take too much water, they were going to the next level. And we highlight that, and we're going to talk about that. You're going to see those interviews in the Call Sign Trailblazer documentary. It's in post-production right now. But that was encouraging to see people like that completely put off by these cartel groups, disgusted by it, and not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And the sad part is, because these people haven't been paid by their distributors for like 2 or 3 years, and one gal is owed like $600,000 of basically
Jeez.
revenue that she hasn't been paid for, and there's no enforcement right now or enough with Department of Cannabis Control in California to recover that money. She and her husband are leaving the business like this year. And if you're going to regulate cannabis and you're going to do it right, those are the people you want to do it, and they're getting run out. So the cartels are sitting back going, hey man, this is great. We'll just, don't change that law. We like that misdemeanor. And we like a kind of a chaotic situation on how these good growers are going to get paid. So, when you muddle deeper into the politics and the policy and really the abuses within a system that's still kind of new, we've only been at it like 5.5 years in California. I mean, we're the weed state of the country, brother. We're one of 6 Mediterranean climates. We're known for, wine, vineyards, the Napa Valley wine. Well, we're the same way with cannabis, man. We're the cannabis state of the world. And, having done so much work in that area environmentally, man, I'd like to see us be exemplary in the world and not be the poor example that we are. And I hope we're just learning nationally from these mistakes.
I want to go back to some of the tactical stuff that you mentioned in the book. You mentioned doing a longer hike to get to a grow area rather than going in from a shorter distance. Why do you do that? I mean, I know it's a good workout, but what else? Why start from further away when you're going to raid a grow site?
Yeah, a lot of it comes into kind of stalking and stealth tactics to be effective at catching people. A lot of these grow sites are set up in such a way that if you come in really close, you're going to make a lot of noise no matter what you do. And some of these grows might be way into a national forest, way into a wilderness area, and we've had those where we've hiked like 8 miles one day and then set up on a ridge not too far from the grow site, so we can move again, in a time frame. I won't say exactly how, but we're going to basically be where we need to be silently, that when these guys are moving around, we can apprehend them as safely as possible. Where we're not going to make a bunch of noise and go through one of their tripwires, one of their punji pits, or what they do is they cut down a bunch of manzanita branches and, put fishing line out with empty cans with rocks in them. And now that blocks their trail, and they have hidden little trails that they got to move all these little noisemakers. And we run into that, and we've got a stack of, a certain number of operators and a dog or several dogs. And now we got to move through that and stop the team. And you know what? Being a still target is a very scary proposition. We kind of have a saying on the team: stillness is death. You want to be really hidden, or you want to be on the move when you need to be on the move. So sometimes we'll come in from a very far distance so we can get set up appropriately and then deal with those little traps I talked about at a good, convenient time. So when it comes to raid moment, nothing's holding us up. Because if we get hung up on a trail and that guy's got a gun, or there's a punji pit there, and our dog can't get to where our dog needs to get to, or I can't cover with a rifle, or my guys can't, or whatever the case may be, that could be a really bad day for all of us. And we've had too much gunplay to even take the chance. And one thing that was cool about when the marijuana enforcement team was greenlit, the whole hidden war period, is that that's all we had to do. So it wasn't like we had to go do fishing patrol. I didn't have to teach a hunter education class, that night. I didn't have to go to a water district meeting. I'm strictly operating on this unit statewide, no boundaries. And, we'd be on the road sometimes, 6-7 days a week. And work through weekends if we were on a particular operation that it demanded that level of attention. And we'll take the time we need to do it safely. And that's the only way you can do it safely is not rushing things and having the drop when you need to.
Yeah, I remember you said you take boats or even kayaks in because those are quiet and you're listening and looking around. I mean, it's really it really does sound like jungle warfare or something like that because you're just in there for, like you said, several days. And I would imagine if these guys are there for months, they're attuned to all the animals and the wildlife, and if it's too quiet or whatever, so you kind of have to get that same advantage, and you can't get that in an afternoon.
No, that is spot on, man. It is such a California is so diverse in terrain, and we have seen grow sites literally in eyesight of the waters crashing on the Pacific Ocean on the Big Sur coastline.
Wow.
And then we've seen grow sites at 11,000, 12,000 feet just below Mount Whitney where glacier water is being diverted by black polypipe. And, we're hiking with the endangered threatened bighorn sheep as we're going into a grow site. I mean, just some of the most beautiful country you'd see, not just in California, brother, but like all over the nation, the world. Redwoods up north, the redwood forest, the dry hot deserts down in Southern California, Riverside where I'm from, San Bernardino, North LA County. All of those areas have plenty of cartel cannabis going on, either in hoop houses or in the outdoors. And yeah, we've had to do everything. We've had to come in on helicopters, a lot on foot. We use ATVs where we need to. We've had to go in on horseback before. One of the coolest trainings I think I ever got to coordinate and be part of with the unit before I retired was Wilderness Horse Patrol, and some of us have grown up on horses like myself and some even better riders that were on the team. And some of our guys and gals are like, oh man, I think I rode one at like a pumpkin patch once for $5,
exactly.
When I was a kid, right? And now here we are, going through a whole day or two on saddles and tack and how to prep this horse, and then taking them into wilderness areas in steep terrain, switchbacks, cliff country, with kit gear on, with overnight gear, to actually go get close enough and execute a raid on a horse, because you can't have a motorized vehicle in wilderness areas. So we can't take a helicopter, we can't take an ATV or a motorcycle. The electric machines like the bikes and stuff just don't quite have what we need them to do. So we've done it all. And I got to say, that was one of the, I think, most rewarding parts about the job was, because I come from the Silicon Valley originally, but I grew up around still the iconic cattle ranchers, true cowboy families that are here in the Silicon Valley foothills today. And people think of the Silicon Valley where you and I are at, and they're like, what? There's cattle ranches and brandings, and, you don't have Yellowstone, the show, happening in Silicon Valley. And you know what we do? I was on a cattle branding yesterday, right before the rain hit, with rancher friends of mine helping out that have had grows on their property before. They've had hunter trespass. They've had all kinds of poaching animals, mountain lions depredating their livestock. I mean, that's the type of stuff we get to do that makes that community connection so cool. And being a lover of all things outdoors, I'm just glad that, the contradiction of the tech capital of the world and some of the finest cattle families in the tech capital foothills coexisting and still keeping that trend going, man, it's just magical. And those are the folks that see us on horses and go, okay, you guys just aren't, on the steel horses coming out of the big helicopters. You can actually ride a horse. I'll give you some respect for that. And we can go in a little quieter. So, yeah, we've pretty much done it all, California's a great state, man. I mean, I definitely, I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I definitely have a concern with the politics and the safety issues going on and things I don't think are being done right. But the people and the diversity and the wildlife resources and what we have coast to coast, border to border, is unmatched by any other state. This is a beautiful frickin' state, and I still love being here and, representing for our people. And I hope someday, somehow, it just gets better and we get to turn things around.
How many people are involved in these grows? Do you have an estimation of how many people are coming up from the cartels to run these trespass grows?
Well,
and are they all illegal? or are they just people? Are there people from all over doing this?
Generally speaking, they are illegal. Generally speaking, a good percentage of them are what are called deportable felons. They basically qualify because of criminal activity that they've either been involved in, maybe not convicted or accused of. You don't know whether it's narcotics trafficking, gun running, sexual assault, aggravated assault, whatever. Most of the cartel gunmen we run into, actually all of them, of the ones we have run into, and a majority of the growers have that criminal background. And they're not citizens of the U.S. They're basically here illegally. And certainly before the very lax opening of the borders, if you will, the end of Title 42 that just recently happened, when we did have some semblance of a proactive border protection policy and trying to solidify a solid, sensible immigration policy, it was hard then to keep these guys out of the country. I mean, when we debriefed that meth cooker I talked about that also oversaw 50 grows, we talked about that issue. I said, we have actually caught a grower that was a gunman, pulled a gun, maybe got bit by one of our dogs, had tons of aggregated felonies. ICE and CBP handled that. He was a deportable felon. He got deported. And a week later, another one of our teams found this guy in a grow again. And I'm not kidding you. We had the same repeat offender that had murder raps, highly violent. It was, I can't even remember how many times, but it was over double digits. This guy was back in California in a year's time, and different dogs from different teams. And now we're all comparing notes this guy laughed during the interview and he goes, look, man, that thing you call the border between Southern California, San Diego County, we call that a road bump. We consider California Mexico North. We never lost it. So it's going to cost me, I'm going to make multiple hundreds of millions of dollars on my cannabis, on what the 50 cannabis markets I'm doing this year as an example. I'm going to make so many hundreds of millions of dollars on that the $4,000 to $7,000 it's going to cost me to have one of my cartel guys on the border get this guy back across right after he's deported, it's a drop in the bucket. It's a time inconvenience. I mean, we've seen them back within 48 hours, 72 hours. Just crazy, man. Just crazy. And now
that is crazy.
And now it's not an issue.
That's terrible.
It is horrible. And the sad part about it is, being a California native most of my life, it's sometimes ignorance is bliss, right? And when I started to realize how many cartel guys are embedded in California doing all of these crimes, not just the cannabis, I think on a rough conservative estimate, if you look at 2 growers per grow cartel related, and you look at 4,000 or 5,000 grow sites back around the time when we had that many grow sites, say in Cali, just for illegal weed cannabis, you're looking at least 10,000 cartel members, just for a very conservative estimate of outdoor growers. But now, Jordan, with it not being the outdoor trespass grows so much, but now the indoor grows that are incentivized inside these hoop houses, and when you add the Asian contingent now of cartel members, the Mexican cartel members, you add in the ones that aren't growing weed, that are doing fentanyl production, distribution, meth, human trafficking. I mean, we're not in the 10,000 number range. We're in the 100,000 member range, realistically, if you just do basic math. And the idea of thinking that they're just coming across doing their business going back is a misnomer. They are embedded, they are comfortable, and under the current administration, operating with impunity and getting very bold, especially on our southwest border, as we just saw, last week, the 4 folks that went down south to do that medical procedure, got abducted, 2 were killed. That's a hot button item. Some of the Instagram reels going around with Sicario gunmen in an Escalade and a BMG Barrett 50 caliber heavy gun and an AK going right down, through Phoenix, Arizona, and there's a police department substation to the right, and they're just laughing as their music continues to play and putting that anonymously on Instagram and saying, "We're here. No one's stopping us."
That's crazy.
It is crazy. And I think one of the coolest things about getting to talk about it with you is, one, your listeners will know and viewers will know a little bit more about what's really going on, and that, even though they may not be affected by it, there's no way this isn't affecting us as a country, as a community. When you look at fentanyl, you look at human trafficking with the children and everything else, and the fact that we have to have some situational awareness, even in the affluent Silicon Valley, because I know what's lurking here, and I know it's lurking in rural Montana, where I'm a full-time resident of now, especially with the meth, fentanyl, and the trafficking. And we just have to be aware of it, and enough people need to say we've had enough and make it a national priority to slow it down, if not stop it. And it's just not right now, and the cartels are showing us that it's not.
What percentage of these guys are we catching, you think?
Oh, God. It would be a hard guess, Bud, but
okay.
And I would say optimistically 10%. And it.
Oh man.
I think that's me being in a good mood today, man, because it's Friday and we're having a great conversation together. It's a lot less than that. I mean, because I just look at the number of arrests you see and the number of people we actually take down. But you look at just the sheer statistics of the number of people that have to be here to do the operation and that are very good at it and just don't get caught unless they sometimes do something really dumb. It's not many. It's a very, very small percentage. I'd say under 10%, for sure.
That's really, really crappy. That sucks. I mean, it seems hopeless because even when you catch them, they turn around and come back 3 days later or whatever it is.
I kind of, I always have a little bit of hope and a little bit of optimism when I talk to my old teammates from Met and what they're doing, and they're doing a really important job because when they hit an illegal grow site, they're basically impacting those other cartel crimes we talked about, indirectly. With public safety being at the top of the priority list, and with the laws kind of against our mission, with the incentivizing we talked about, Prop 64. And all those things, I just kind of tell them, and I tell other agencies that I talk to or other people I train, I go, look at this as a marathon, not a sprint. Look at it as a long-term war that is really a hidden war. We didn't name the book that for no reason. I mean, it really is a truly hidden war because we wouldn't have this magnitude of problem if it was a little more overt and a national priority. But the thing I tell the guys is, hey, man, if you get one illegal hoop house taken out and that product never makes it to the market to poison some high schooler that's trying cannabis for the first time that has a big football scholarship or she's a valedictorian or something, right? And you stop that water from being stolen and you saved, 4 million gallons of underground water in California's worst drought. Even if you make no arrests and they're going to go do it 50 other places, you still made a little bit of a dent on that one site. So it's like an NFL chunk play, man. You're not going to get the vertical 70-yard freaking wide receiver into the end zone, but you're going to get a ground and pound 3-yard victory every time you take one of those raids out and you keep a dent. And I got to tell you, as stacked as the politics are against my teammates and my old agency doing the job they're doing, man, I admire and respect, and those are my heroes because it's gotten a lot worse since I left agency, pushing... Yeah, we're pushing 3, 4, or 5 years now, and they just stay in the fight, And what's really going to help is awareness of people saying, hey, it's not just game wardens, not just DEA or sheriffs. It's all of our LEOs, all of our first law enforcement officers, our first responders that are dealing with this cartel threat on some level. They may not be in the woods doing the game warden sheriff thing, but they're surely going to experience a fentanyl interdiction or a crisis or know somebody that died in the family. And I now have friends and family members of friends right here in the Silicon Valley that have taken a dirty pill from a fentanyl bottle that looked like an oxycodone, and she was slated. She had a great scholarship, valedictorian, doing a bunch of sports, star volleyball player, a lot of inner knee soreness, and took a pill from a friend for pain relief, not even to get high at a party, and didn't wake up didn't wake up to go to school the next day.
Oh my God! That's awful.
Right here in the Los Altos area of Silicon Valley, and a friend told me that story just a couple months ago, she was related to that young lady, and man, if that doesn't make it any more personal, I don't know what is. And that's why every little bit our guys are doing out there, and every little bit the public that are watching this podcast or watching any of these documentaries just go, okay, this is bullshit. I got to learn more about it. And next time policy comes up like a Prop 64, I need to read the fine print, because Jordan, ironically, one of my jobs as a lieutenant team leader of MET was 30% of that was outreach and education. So the PowerPoint roadshow, speaking at conferences, but it's talking to lobbyists, legislature groups under the previous governor before we regulated especially, and telling them the story and showing them the graphic pictures. I said, look, we know regulation is coming. We know it can be done right. Just if you regulate, please keep the bite against the cartels or trespass growers or illegal growers. Keep a deterrence factor in there. Keep the felony. Keep aggravated charges and penalties for water stealing. And it was, yeah, we got to do that, man. Thanks for all you're doing. Yeah, that's horrible. We have that happening in this state. And then when it passed and I saw the language, I just, I can't tell you how shell-shocked I was, man. I was like, what just happened? So we watered it down to a misdemeanor and an infraction for juveniles to get it to pass. Was this just something someone needed for the revenue or the taxation, they thought? Because
crazy.
Because there wasn't any logical reason to do it unless it was financially based and it was vote based just to get cannabis passed. And it can be done so well. And there are some underground movements. There have been some bills recently proposed that I don't think will see the light of day currently in California, but basically to repeal and amend Prop 64.
Sure. I mean, look,
Why not?
Pain pills are legal, but I can't produce them at home and then
right.
not get in trouble for it. So what the hell? I mean, this should be regulated like the drug that it is. And look, I'm sympathetic if somebody is like, look, I grow my own weed. I got 5 plants in the backyard, or 10 or 20, whatever it is. It's on my property. Fine, whatever. But when you have 7,000, it's kind of hard to argue like, hey, man, it's just a hobby. Look, I broke into this guy's land and I set up a giant farm illegally in the middle of a nationally protected forest. But it's kind of a little side hustle that I got going. Come on.
Yeah.
Makes no sense.
I think you hit it on the head. This isn't just the Cheech and Chong days of a couple of hippies in Humboldt County, that are growing for a little personal consumption. Maybe they're going to trade it, make a couple bucks at the farmer's market. We're way past that. We are way past that, and it's not going to fix overnight, but you can kind of arm people doing what I used to do, and the women and the men that are the real heroes of the day under very tough laws right now, continuing to do it. Give them a better tool belt with a better law to enforce, and see legitimate cannabis thrive, and actually have these cannabis farmers like the 2 gals I just mentioned that we're going to feature. Have them celebrated for doing it by the numbers, and coming and taking the good steps to come out of the dark when they could have made a bunch of money on the black market that was completely cash, that was never going to be taxed. They were never going to need to spend $80,000 on 10 different permits from agencies to have a legal growing farm. But they elected to do that just to try to do it right. And you know what? You look at that and you ask them, wow, how's that going? And I'm like, can I honestly say that I recommend you go legal as a law enforcement officer that enforced marijuana for the latter half of my career? I can't ethically tell them that's a good idea, because it's not. And they're finding that out on their own. And that's why things like laws have to change so we can get more legitimate cannabis working in California as it needs to, and be a better example, because other states are regulating. My new home state of Montana's got some recreational legislation coming and going. They're dabbling and doing. They've just made some changes. A lot of states are doing it, but not everybody's doing it well. And that's we got to look big picture. There's too many lives at risk. And you said it. The 7,000 plants or these manufacturing these dirty pills. Come on. I mean, this is home-based stuff.
Thanks for coming on the show, man. I guarantee you most people have never heard of this, and I'm glad we're able to bring awareness to the issue. It's creepy that there's drug cartel operations and this scale of environmental damage just kind of literally right in my backyard, or our backyard.
Yeah, man, it's great to finally connect with you. I've been following your stuff, man. Keep it up. Thanks a bunch, and thanks for helping promoting just kind of what we're doing. I do want to let people know that if people want more information on this, they want any speaking done on it, I speak all over the country to this. I educate. Just go to johnnorris.com. It's JOHNNORES. You can get to my email for any questions related to this subject, or even people wanting to go into conservation law enforcement and be a game warden. I can't tell you how many hundreds, if not thousands, of young folks and older folks that are coming over to this profession and wanting to do it. And I know you've got a copy, but if I could just throw it out there, the second edition of Hidden War just dropped. You got one of the first copies.
I did, yeah.
And it's got updated information in it to take us into some of what we discussed. And it's on Amazon in print copy, Kindle, Audible. And if you want a personalized copy, hit me up through my email, and I do a lot of those orders. And everyone that's getting into the book and getting into the story are helping become part of that thin green line, and that's what we're going to need. And I can't thank you enough, man.
Thanks for checking out this entire episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There, we dive even deeper on this and many other topics. In the audio podcast, I also close open loops, cover things discussed off camera, off air, and give some parting lessons from our guest. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcast app, or at jordanharbinger.com. And also, if you found this episode useful, please share it with those you care about. Last but not least, like, comment, and subscribe.